Hello, everybody. Welcome to The Squadron, the podcast devoted to creating and optimizing a healthy and fulfilling life for first responders all around the world. I am your host, Garrett Slaw. I'm a sergeant for a sheriff's department in Southern California, and on this show, I talk to experts in a variety of fields looking for those force multipliers that I can apply to my own life. I want to make us happier and healthier so we can tackle our challenging careers with energy and focus. The entire purpose of this podcast is to make myself better and share what I'm learning with you. Before we get to the interview, I want to remind you that you can get more information on this episode, including show notes and links, by going to thesquadron.net. You can sign up for our mailing list. You can also subscribe on iTunes and Stitcher, and of course, follow me on Instagram and Twitter at The Squadron. Our guest today, my first international guest, Shaun O'Gorman, host of the Strong Life Project podcast with a website under the same name. Shaun was a police officer for 13 years. And he has an incredible story, a story that he's going to share with us, a story that I think is going to connect with a lot of you. You're going to hear a lot of similar themes in his talk, and hopefully his authenticity and his honesty in how he ended up dealing with these issues can help somebody out there today. This topic today is really on PTSD, on depression, and on suicide, and those things that we need to be more aware of as law enforcement officers. Shaun will tell you that he himself did not realize these things when he was young, early in his career, but that the cumulative stresses of this, coupled with some family dynamic, left him to the point where he was putting the gun in his mouth. And I know, because of emails I've gotten, that based on the listeners, he's not alone. So there's someone out there who I know is going to listen to Shaun's story and connect with it deeply. It's an important one, and I'm really happy to have Shaun on. It was an honor for him. He's in Australia, and he's a cop in Australia. Was a cop in Australia. He's retired now. It's like 3:30 in the morning where he is when we did this interview, and the poor guy got up in the middle of the night to talk to me, and I am humbled by that commitment to him and his efforts in the Strong Life Project podcast and the stronglifeproject.com to help officers and help people who are struggling with some of these things, and then him really shining light on it and leading the way out of the darkness for a lot of people. So you can get more information on Shaun at the end of this episode, and of course at thesquadron.net. It's a great conversation. So here we are, Shaun O'Gorman of the Strong Life Project. Shaun O'Gorman of the Strong Life Project, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Garrett. So happy to be on. I'm
excited to have you. You're my first international guest. I've interviewed a lot of people, and surprisingly to me, I have the show has a good following in other modern westernized countries such as yours, Australia, and probably get next to the U.S. get more emails out of Australia than anywhere else. So it's fun to connect with someone who does this job on the exact opposite end of the world. So thanks for being on. We have a lot to talk about today, but I just wanted to get out there that you're all the way out there in Australia, and we connected. Like people do these days, social media. It's amazing how the two of us, could have this conversation that started a couple weeks ago. We have no connection to each other than our ability to get on social media, and then our ability to both have a podcast that we can share. It's pretty cool,
mate. I'm so happy to be on, and it blows me away. And that I found your podcast just through, I listened to them myself and searching for police podcasts and found it, man. I think it's fantastic. But to me, that's the thing that, for me, makes me so happy to be able to get this message out easily over the internet all over the world and make a difference to people as much as we can. So happy to be here. I think you do a fantastic job.
Likewise. And so Shaun's podcast is the Strong Life Project, and it's not just about law enforcement, though it's obviously heavily related to that. But we'll get to the Strong Life, but I want to kind of tell your story in the continuity of your story, and the Strong Life is what you're doing now. But I want to go back and start with the fact that you're a retired police officer in Australia, and you did 13 years with an agency down there. Tell us about the time you did in service, and what were your assignments, and then what's the agency that you dealt with, or that you worked for? What was it like, size and that sort of thing?
Yeah, sure. So I joined the police. I'm 47 now. I was 19. My dad was a cop for 42 years, so it was very much in my family. My uncle was a cop. So I joined in 1989 and left in 2002. So 13 years on the job, 9 years of that as a canine handler. I had a couple of years in covert surveillance. So did a couple of different things, but majority as a canine handler, so on the street, general duties, what you guys call patrol. And in a town that's about 2.5 million people. And so usually working the night shifts, working 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. or 8 to 6 a.m. And all the, what we call the hot jobs, like the first responder jobs of, the fights and gun calls and domestic violence, etc., all of those sort of things. Mm-hmm. So, mate, yeah, loved it. It was fantastic.
So let me ask you a question that I'll admit that I don't know the answer to, and I'm sure someone else is out there thinking that too, but I think you probably know more about American policing than I know about Australian policing. Is there a huge difference in the type of environment and dynamic and the training?
No, look, I think from what I understand about law enforcement in the US, the probably difference for us is we don't have the same gun culture in Australia. So that's the main difference I look at. But when I was on the job, we still we had a thing here called the Port Arthur massacre in Tasmania, early 2000s, when a guy killed a dozen or 15 people at a tourist resort, for want of a better place, a historical site. So our Prime Minister, like your President, at the time outlawed pretty much all firearms. So, people on farms and they have firearms, but most people don't. Back when I was in the police, there was still a lot of illegal handguns and a lot of long arms. So the difference is probably we don't have the same amount of gun crime or the same interaction with firearms. But apart from that, mate, pretty simple. Pretty much the same things, and the bad guys still have guns. At the end of the day, we don't deal with what I would presume you guys might get, a domestic situation where somebody has a fight with their wife and then it turns pretty serious because they have firearms involved. We don't have that. Mm-hmm. But, outside of that, probably very similar.
It's neat to hear, and we'll get to your book in a little bit too, but reading your book, how some of the things are flipped back and forth. Just like code 2 for you is lights and siren. Code 3 is no lights and siren, and that's the opposite for us. Little things like that made me chuckle. So you did your time. Your father was a police officer, and so you grew up in that culture. Was it something that just from an early age you wanted to do, or was it sort of that you got to your late teens and just figured why not? What was it?
No, mate, always wanted to do it. So my dad, he's 42 years in the police, pretty highly decorated for bravery, and he was the president of our police union, like a police association, for a number of years, looking after police. So from a very young age, mate, I always remember I was 6 years of age and I went to our police academy with my dad, and they had the canine guys doing a display. And I remember there and then that day looking and think, yeah, that's what I want to do, be a canine handler. So that was sort of my focus my whole childhood and in my teenage years. Hence the reason I didn't study too hard at high school and was by no meaning an academic or a scholar. Mate, joined the job at 19, so it was always in my blood and very much driven out of the same reason I do Strong Life and the same reason I wrote my book is just I want to help people and make a difference. As naive as that sounds, I think that's why a lot of guys get on the job and girls get on the job, is just to try and help people.
Do you think, it's funny you said that, as naive as that sounds, but at 47 years old, I don't think, is it naive anymore, or is it, are we still holding on to something? I find that a lot of officers, we still have this desire to help people, and we want to be the hero for other people, right?
Absolutely.
And not from a narcissistic standpoint in some sense, but in that sheepdog sense, right? And so I wonder sometimes, are we just being altruistic, or are we in fact right and everyone else is just the pessimist? You know what I mean?
Absolutely, mate. Yeah, and that's such an interesting thing, Garrett, because I absolutely believe that it's such a noble profession, like police and military, such a noble profession, and any first responders, paramedics, ambulance, fire, sure. Everybody's the same. But I think that it's one of the things that I'm really passionate about getting out, and why I do what I do now is because we should be celebrating that. People who get on the job because they want to help people and make a difference, and as you say, be the hero for other people in such a humble sense, should be celebrated. But unfortunately, certainly here in Australia, and I think for you guys in the States and around the world, it's something we're almost a bit embarrassed to say. A bit embarrassed to say, look, I want to help people and make a difference. That's my purpose in life, and I live by that. And I find the more that I come out of the closet with that, as funny as that sounds, and say that's what I really want to do with my life, is help people and make a difference, people love that. People, they relate to it and they appreciate it. But we've got a thing we call here the tall poppy syndrome, and people who stick their head above the crowd and want to do more than the normal person and get cut down. I'm sure you guys are probably not dissimilar. For me, the big thing is going, if we can all be embracing that fact that it's about helping people, making a difference, that's why we got on the job, that's why we did all those things, then it allows people to step into that, and you're not trying to, fit an identity or fit something that other people want. Because at the end of the day, what other people think really shouldn't matter, but it does.
Yeah. You just hit something right there that could have been the podcast itself, this whole episode, because I was having this conversation with my friend Traver, who's been a co-host of this show at times, and we were chatting back and forth one day, and I was describing this awkwardness I felt, like we all do, a lot of us do, about the fact that we're in law enforcement, and especially in these times, especially in the U.S., where there's a lot of contentious relationships between the cops and the public right now.
Absolutely.
And we're getting further and further apart, and we're kind of intentionally building walls between each other. So I was describing how this kind of culture and attitude is affecting me, and he said that it sounded like I was ashamed of being a cop. And though certainly shame isn't the right word, it was an interesting point, because here I am wanting to be that guy, be that hero, go out and help people.
Yeah.
But I wasn't okay talking about it or looking like I was puffing my chest out and trying to be that hero in the narcissistic sense, right? In the look at me sense. And I think coming to terms with that difference is a big deal, and it's important, in order to talk about being a police officer out in public with some confidence that you're on the right side of history. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And, Matt, I think, going back to my experience and also, I've got a lot of friends who are still on the job here. And the thing that I find really interesting, and even just when I see police in my day-to-day life, I'll train in the morning, go and have a coffee at a particular coffee shop, and often there's officers there. And you can see they're often almost embarrassed, might not be the word, but they're hesitant to make eye contact with people or interact because they're so used to, similar to you guys over there, so used to people, being negative towards police. And I think a big part of that I realised after I left the job was you only see people at their worst. And one of my favourite sayings is I say, when was the last time you guys, any of you guys, or we got in our patrol car, went around and knocked on someone's door and said, hey, you're having the best day of your life, just thought we'd drop in and say hi. It never happens, right?
Right?
So you only ever see people at their worst. So they're either, as an offender or as the victim of a crime, or you're delivering a death message, or they're in a traffic accident or something horrific, right? So You see them at their worst. So I very much got to the point in my life where I used to look at people, anybody who didn't wear a uniform, to me was just not a great human being. I had such a cynical and twisted perception of humanity in general. And I think that therefore has you very isolated from general society, and you very much ring-fence them with other cops. All you talk about is police work. All you interact about is, how shit you think society is and how bad people are, or whatever that may go in that conversation. So, of course, inevitably, you don't want to tell people you're a cop, or you don't want to own that, want to be a hero and help people because you feel embarrassed. And a lot of what obviously media portrays is that, cops are heavy-handed and they do this and they do that. And I spent, obviously 9 years in the canine unit doing heaps of pretty violent jobs and probably in a couple of fistfights a week and had a number of, excessive force complaints from offenders. We went through a real period there when I was in the police that every criminal defence lawyer, when you'd catch somebody for a violent crime, would say, look, put a complaint against the officer because it discredits them when you get to court. So I had probably 7 years of complaints, and I wasn't heavy-handed by any means. I was certainly very enthusiastic in the way I did my duties, and I loved being a cop. So I went very hard. But so, mate, you're very much getting to that point, I think, where we're scared to own it. And I find now the sad part, and I've been out of the police 15 years, one of the reasons I'm so passionate about doing what I'm doing now is I'm more proud of being a cop now that I've left than I was when I was a cop. And I think that's a pretty sad thing.
Yeah, but it's nice that you have the perspective being able to go back on it. So I want to talk about a little bit about the book you're writing right now, because it's about your time in the police service and the things that occurred before and during that have brought you now to where you're at. And I think it's important to get that context. So, but in this book, and you were kind enough to give me an advanced copy of it, which I read, and you talk about this character. You have this character in this book called the Dark Companion. And I'm hoping you can tell people what that is.
Yeah, sure. So I called the book The Dark Companion after probably I was 3/4 of the way through writing it. The Dark Companion is that I got to the point of PTSD, depression, suicide, clinical depression, suicide. So I was in a really bad spot. And it came about because of all the incidents I'd been to, all the things I'd seen. I was so enthusiastic and loved the job so much that I went to everything I could get to. And The Dark Companion was just that. The only way that I could describe it, like the depression or the sadness, the suicidal thoughts, the hopelessness, the feeling of overwhelm that I experienced, often that it just felt like I just had this dark shadow follow me around. So hence the reason it's called The Dark Companion. The thing that I find really ironic now is I'm so happy to talk about it and, obviously get on an international podcast with someone like yourself and spill my guts on a story that I would never have even told anyone about for that whole time in my career. I told nobody that it even existed. And hence the reason it got to the point where it got to. So the only time I felt really good when I was in the police, and this sort of from when I first joined it was pretty good, but as it went on it got worse, was when I was going your code 3, our code 201, lights and sirens on the way to a hot job, something violent where I could make a difference. And I didn't have time to be in my mind and have the fears, doubts, insecurities about what I was doing. It was just purely instinctual. So when I'm running on that gut instinct, driving, 1,000 miles an hour, lights and sirens, going to a job, a guy with a gun or something, whatever it might be, armed hold-ups or vehicle pursuits, that's when I was at my most comfortable and I felt awesome because I didn't have time to think about that. So the Dark Companion really is just that dark thoughts, the fears, the doubts, the stuff that you wrap up in your own mind about how you're reacting to your job, how you're doing your job, are you doing it well, are you not? All of those things that I think everybody experiences. And that just sort of sat with me. So that's what I came to call it. I didn't call it that at the time, but now I look back, that's absolutely what it was.
Was this something that that came with you before the job, you think, or that started maybe before the job? Was there a predisposition towards these insecurities and fears that came with you? Because we all have those, right? I mean,
absolutely.
It's part of just growing up.
Mate, I think that. Sorry, might I cut you off?
No, go ahead.
Definitely there was, and retrospectively, it came a lot from my dad. Like we've got the good Irish Catholic background, so that comes with all its own demons and insecurities and things. So that's pretty standard. Dad, obviously a cop for 42 years, saw a lot of he had to take someone's life, taking a suspect's life in an incident in 1978. So I think a lot of my stuff probably was almost hereditary or handed down from his experience. And because I worship my dad from being the cop he was, he's just an amazing guy, that I look at that and think I probably took a lot of it on from him. And that's not a criticism of him at all. I think it's actually a bit of a testament to the sort of character he is. So I sort of always had it there. But again, like you said, we all have it. We all have those same fears, doubts, insecurities. We all have the dark places in our minds we go to. And it may not be as severe where you get to suicide. I don't think that's, everybody has that. I think it's probably a lot more often than people admit. But it's something that we all carry with it. So I definitely had it before the job. And when I talk to people about this stuff, and obviously I do all the time, I think if I had have had the tools and strategies before I went into the police or as I joined the police to understand that was just very normal, and if I also was able to process the things as I went to each incident or through things that had an impact on me in the job, and probably the thing that had the biggest impact was dealing with the department. So it's the odd, you want to go out, do a great job and go 100 miles an hour and do your best, and then, I used to be renowned for driving pretty fast. So, I'd burn out, blow up police cars or burn out brake pads or, crash them and all those sort of things. So you've got all that administrative sort of stress on top. To learn how to deal with all of that so that the term I use, so your bucket doesn't get full. So like there's a bucket that carries all the shit that you get in your life. And if your bucket is full with normal life stress, marriages, whatever it is that's going on, then you add policing on top of that. No wonder you have, police have an adverse reaction.
How long into your service did you begin to maybe you probably didn't recognize it at the time, but maybe now, how far in were you when you started to see these changes?
Mate, probably only 3 or 4 years, 5 years. I had a significant incident in about 5 years in that I talk about in the book where we were involved in a vehicle pursuit with two guys who fired multiple shots, and they had a 303 rifle and a 223 rifle, and they actually went out with the purpose of suicide by cop. So obviously we didn't know at the time. Ended up in a pretty serious pursuit with them, and I ended up in a foot chase through like a mall area, so a nightclub restaurant sort of precinct on a Monday night, and chased them down around the corner, and they both shot themselves right in front of me. So, only a few meters away. And that obviously had a pretty big impact, but at the time I didn't realise. So I was only 24 or something when that happened. So, and I think without that sort of major incident, and there was plenty of other, obviously violent incidents, but nothing that significant, that probably put, who knows, 10 years or 5 years worth of stress on me in one day. And I didn't recognise it at the time. I just brushed it off. And a lot of those things about not wanting to be weak, not wanting to look like a coward, so I didn't get help for it. I actually avoided the whole job, and it's ironic. I spoke to another retired police officer, a woman the other day, and she I hadn't seen her for years, and she reached out to me, heard I was writing the book, and talked about the incident she was involved in. And she said to me, she said, we didn't see you after the incident. So I avoided the whole thing. So in hindsight, I avoided it because of the impact, and I just buried it. But I think that was probably the critical one. And that may well have been why after 13 years I ended up where I was. But regardless, Garrett, I think I would have ended up there at some point, because it's a cumulative effect. Every incident you see, everything that happens, sort of puts a little bit more shit in that bucket, if you like. Mm-hmm. And it may well be you relate to it because, there might be a 9-year-old girl involved that's in the domestic violence, and you have a 9-year-old daughter. It might be, whatever. There could be anything that's relatable back to you and makes the people involved more human, has that effect. And something, I do work with different people a lot, and I was working with a guy who's now got a UFC fighter here from Australia, and he's an ex-serviceman, ex-soldier, went to Afghanistan. And I spoke to him and I said, mate, look, I look at it like this. If what we see and do doesn't affect you at all, then be more concerned, because that shows that you're very disconnected. And this sounds pretty harsh to say, but I think if you're not affected at all by what you do as a police officer or a soldier or a first responder, then you potentially might want to go and get checked out for being a sociopath, because it's just something that I think has to occur, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's a very good point. What were your coping mechanisms back in at that time? Was it what were you doing to deal with this at all? Maybe you actually were avoiding it, but what did you think you were doing to deal with this?
Yeah, alcohol. Yeah. So the truth of the matter is, alcohol, self-medication. And so I was involved in a group of guys. There was probably 15 or 20 of us who were, in our early 20s, all in the job together at that point. So we worked very hard. And we partied really hard. So worked 10 days straight, then go and drink for 2 or 3 days. I wasn't married, didn't have kids. So I was just very much party town. And in those days, mate, people, young ladies loved cops. So, we were pretty arrogant and pretty cocky. And so it was pretty much what we did. And so when I look back now, that really was it, like hanging out with my mates and talking about it, like telling war stories. Mm-hmm. And we're very much about, so it was either on the job, talking about the job, reliving what we did, and drinking and partying. So it was probably not the best coping mechanism, but that was certainly it.
It's a popular one for us too, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You go out and you share beers, you talk about it, you basically rehash it, bring it up again.
Yeah.
And then you have this, and then a common one, and then we always like to one-up each other with the best cop story, and you're basically sharing someone else's trauma experience as well. You write in the book that you eventually, by the time you got to your mid-20s, you didn't think you were going to live past 30. And
no, mate, that's right.
And that you almost had a death wish. What made you think that you weren't going to make it to 30?
Man, I think it was just the reality of the job I was doing and the way I was doing it, as in I just lived and breathed it. I loved it so much that I just thought, if you look at it from almost a statistical point of view, the reality of it is that I'm probably going to get killed in a car accident in violent incident with a shootout with an offender, or it would get to the point because I knew I wasn't handling it that well, and it when I reread the book, it's obviously I was going through dark times, but not every day was bad, right? So there was far more good days than bad, but when the bad days were bad, I was like, I just couldn't see myself living in 40, 50, 60 years of my life in that same headspace. Mm-hmm. So one way it was like there's probably a reality of me getting killed in the line of duty, as a number of police officers in the department I worked for did. And the other side of it was going, well, and if that happens, then I'm probably okay with that because I'm living the dream now. And if it's going to keep getting worse, then this is, go out with a bang sort of thing.
Yeah, you talk about the idea that you like the idea of being martyred for the cause of protecting other people. Yeah,
absolutely, mate. And it's bizarre, and it sounds so strange when you sort of quote it back to me, actually, because to me, I was so driven, and all I wanted to do was help people make a difference. All I wanted to do was be a fantastic cop and really stand on that thin blue line, right? And when I left the police, the biggest thing I struggled with was giving up that space on the thin blue line between the good guys and the bad guys. And I'm sure the police on your podcast can relate to it. And I think probably the public might think that's a bit of a weird thing to say, but that's sort of how it felt. And that part of it for me was understanding that I was giving my best, and the best thing I was in my life was a cop. The best things I'd achieved in my life was, police work. So if I was to die doing something that I loved and die protecting other people and die doing some good, then that was a sacrifice I was willing to make.
Talk too about how even though you wanted to be a canine handler since you were a little kid, you eventually get that job. There's 43 dogs in your 6,000 member department, if I'm correct.
Correct.
Remember?
Yep.
And even with that dream job that you've worked for the whole time, like many things in life, we finally get it, we attain it, and realize that's not what's going to make us happy after all anyway. And it sounds like in reading from your book and talking to you that you were beginning to feel like your beliefs and values weren't in alignment anymore. And we talk about that frequently on this show. What was it about the job that you were becoming less fulfilled by, and what were you searching for?
Yeah, it's touch on something that you just said then about, like, it was very much, once I get that, I'll be happy. That's was a recurring theme in my life. So once I'm a canine handler, then everything will be fantastic. The problem was, I had the job I loved, but I still thought the same way and had those same sort of insecurities or whatever. The thing that I found, just became jaded and cynical with the job because I went into it with such an altruistic view of just being able to help people and make a difference no matter what. Mm-hmm. And then I ended up in an environment created by myself where, there was, there's a couple of incidents I talk about in the book where, I was tasked to go to particular incidents where people are in trouble or, there's potential violence, and it's for us, like a code 3 job. So like for you guys, I don't know what you call it, but like just drive normally. No lights and sirens, no priority driving, nothing. And then, this is the battle I have with that, and I would still go priority lights and sirens, and therefore I'd get myself in trouble with the department. Then, I'd get to the job and there'd be offenders who were violent and had, committed some pretty horrific crimes against people, and then in the process of arresting them, obviously they don't just give up, put their hands up and go, oh yeah, thanks, I'm happy to come with you. So we'd end up in some violent struggles, and invariably they get injured, and I'd get injured, or I'd use a dog, put the dog on them or whatever, and then complaints. And so where I just struggled in my probably naivety at that point to go, we're supposed to be here helping people, protecting them on that thin blue line, but the harder I work and the more people I lock up and the better a job I do, the more shit I get in. So it just started to really unravel that whole belief, and that my belief, not in what I did, but my belief in and the ability for other people in the public or the department or whatever to understand how important it was. Mm-hmm. And how important it was that there were guys out there doing the job that, as I've heard you talk about on your podcast before, other people don't want to do. And unfortunately, the people who criticise cops the worst, I believe, are the people who would never have the courage to put on a uniform and go and do it themselves.
Mm-hmm. I agree 100%. So do you think, was it just a frustration then, a generalized anger at the fact that people don't understand what we're dealing with?
Absolutely, mate, very much. So it started in frustration, got to anger pretty quickly, and then again, what I touched on earlier about then isolating yourself in that, you only hang out with cops, you only talk to cops, you only talk about police work. So it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy of, the more they hate us, the more we stick together. The more they hate us, the more we stick together. It just becomes almost a vicious circle.
Yeah, which is really the exact opposite of what we need to be doing, right?
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah. But it's hard, man. It's so hard on an individual level, on an organization level, even on a squad level, just a couple patrol guys. You said a great thing earlier about the eye contact in a coffee shop or whatnot, and that awkwardness there. But we have to be the ones we've put on the uniform and we've sworn to uphold the law. But so we have, my belief is we have an obligation to be the first to extend our hand and offer a handshake.
And yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I was at I've got a good friend of mine, and she's a retired cop, and she's now a firefighter. And we've been friends for about 5 years. Met through
She finally made
CrossFit.
a good decision. She made a good decision.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. So she's we were sitting in a coffee shop yesterday, just having a chat, and four guys turned up from what we call the public safety response team, so like the riot squad sort of thing. So they're tasked to do general patrols, and they're fully kitted up, and they look very SWAT-esque, very Stormtrooper-esque, and they've sort of walked into the coffee shop, and she's introduced me to one of them, and I was looking at the other three guys who were standing back, and it just struck me. I thought, wow, they are so defensive in their energy or their attitude towards people, and so it's no wonder cops end up in a space, and I get it, I absolutely get it, where they feel as though everybody's against them, because these guys were standing back. And even to me, and I love police, and I love what the job stands for, and I'm looking at them going, even I look at them and go, wow, they looked really arrogant and really unapproachable, because obviously they're defensive. So therefore that same vicious cycle starts where a member of the public's probably not going to have the courage to walk up and talk to them. So the cops then see that. So the member of the public's looking, how does it start? Who knows? But the chicken and the egg, the member of the public's looking at the police officer thinking, no way am I going near that guy or girl, because they just look like they're angry and I'm going to get my head bitten off if I do. And then the cops looking at the members of the public see they don't give a shit about us. They don't even look at us. They won't even come anywhere near us.
Right.
So, and it builds this massive void that then I believe gets filled and perpetuated by media, because it's great to sell papers. That's controversial. And then, other organisations, and I'm no good mentioning them on your podcast. I don't want to give them any airplay, but people who are then, with the advent of social media, we talked before, is such a fantastic thing for guys like you and I to be able to connect and make a difference across the globe. But unfortunately, then every idiot who's got his opinion and hides in his mum's cupboard with his keyboard can also get on there and put their opinion as to law enforcement, what police should do. So it's a difficult thing.
Mm-hmm. It's funny too. As we're having this conversation, I have two guys who just got assigned to my squad fresh off training, so they just finished the academy, they just finished their field training, and now they just finished their first week with me. And I love having you guys on my squad, but I remember in that time, going through the academy, they would run you through scenarios, and almost always it turned into a deadly force or officer safety situation, right? It was never I never went through a scenario in training in the academy where I was standing in a coffee shop and someone came up to shake my hand, say thank you, good job, and then walk away, right? There was always the scenario where the guy came up to shake my hand and then pulls a knife out of his back, So we predispose ourselves to this defensive-ness too, which is important from a safety standpoint. But, I watch the new guys now that I have the perspective of a decade later. I watch the new guys in the perspective, and they're kind of, shuffle stepping to everything, to all contacts, and they're having a conversation with a victim with their arms up or their hands up in front of their face, right, just ready for that attack from grandma who just got her car broken into. It takes a long time to break that down, right? And the public doesn't know that this guy's got exactly 48 hours on the street versus a decade. Of course, the criminals know. They know right away.
That's right.
The criminals know right away who's the rookie and who's the vet. But the general public, the people who aren't committing crimes, they have no idea. And so you got someone who's on their first day, eyes wide open, scared to death, and trained that everyone's out there to hurt you. That interaction has to be as quality with the public as mine does 10 years later, where I'm able to see a little bit more color in the picture. It's challenging. It's a real challenge.
And mate, I find, and the irony of it is for police is that every member of the public judges every person in uniform as the whole, right? So every cop, and there's bad apples, people make mistakes, people do silly things. So, I generally look around and go, there's a great percentage of society who don't who aren't that effective in their lives, and that's who police get recruited from. So we're all going to have our idiosyncrasies, and we're all going to make our mistakes, right?
Right.
But the problem is, we get judged, or police get judged by people. Every cop gets judged by every other cop in uniform anywhere in the world, but we don't judge the general public by every member of the public. So, and nor ever could you. So, but the thing that I find, and big reason why I'm doing this, mate, and obviously I've written the first book and I've just finished my second one. I've knocked that over in like the last 8 weeks, and that one's called Surviving the Job That's Trying to Kill You, and that's about these sort of things, you know. So a lot of that is about, I talk about training and a lot of stuff you're about, mate, like training and nutrition, sleep hygiene and blah, 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 but also talking about those sort of things, what I call the prehabilitative. We have rehabilitation if you hurt yourself, prehabilitation that is about how cops learn early on about exactly these sort of things. So the sort of things you don't get taught in the academy, the sort of things we all instinctively learn and subconsciously use, like as a sergeant on a squad with 10 years on the job, you've got so much amazing knowledge that you don't even know you have. And the difficulty that is for us to be able to transfer that knowledge. Someone like me, and I'm in a very unique position of having had 13 years on the job, having had 47 years of very intimate contact with the police through my dad, that I see it from all angles now. And as having been out in the normal corporate world for 15 years, the thing that people still are the most interested in about me when they meet me or talk to me is that I used to be a cop. And like even now, and they all go, it's an awesome job. Why? I couldn't do it. You guys do a great job. And I feel quite weird about it because I'm like, well, I've been out of it now longer than I was in it. Mm-hmm. When they call you guys, or even you might notice that I change tense on whether I say you or us, even in this podcast, because I feel that's, sort of to me, I go, well, who am I now to be commenting on police officers and their work? I don't even do it anymore. But all of those things to me, mate, is being able to explain to, young officers and old officers, like guys who are good friends of mine. I've got a great mate of mine who's an officer in charge of a station here. It's probably got 80 or 100 staff. And I was chatting to him. I sent him a transcript of my second book a couple of days ago, and he's a really funny guy. And he's what I would call fairly emotionally distant, and by his own admission. And when I sent him my first book, and obviously you've read it, there's a bit of stuff in there about the relationship with Dad and I, and different things. And I sent it to him, and about 15 minutes later, I got a text message back from him. He said, "Started reading your book. Brought up too much stuff about me and my old man, so now I'm playing Xbox." We all know what I'm like, so he's not by any means any guy who's in a personal development, whatever. And he rang me and said, and I don't want this to sound like I'm trying to blow my own trumpet by any means, but he rang and said, "Who wrote this for you?" And I said, "I wrote it." And he goes, "Did you have a ghostwriter?" I said, "No." He goes, "Oh man," he said, "it's brilliant. It reads so well." He said, "Even someone," his words, "as emotionally retarded as I am, read this." He goes, "This is brilliant." He goes, "I could see how so many cops can get so much out of it." He goes, "I've only read 2 or 3 chapters." And he said, "It's simple stuff that I know, but I've never thought of." So to me, it's that sort of stuff, Garrett. It's the guys that, it's actually having that conversation. Go, you know what? You're going to go to coffee shops, and you might go to a snack bar or to the supermarket to get something for dinner or whatever. And when people look at you, they're looking at you out of admiration. 90% of people admire cops, and they're so happy cops are around. And 90% of kids at some point want to be a cop or a fireman. And so if police were able to embrace that, trust themselves in their operational skills and knowledge to know when it's a threat or not, but actually sort of, as Dr. Phil as this sounds, drop the walls a bit and invite a bit more of that interaction and conversation, then you'd find that the public would react so much better. It's the old vocal minority as opposed to the silent majority. The great majority of people that I find now that I speak to anywhere love cops. Mm-hmm. But, they also, they're the same insecurities or fears that the cop has about talking to the member of the public. It's probably 10 times more for the other way around because they don't want to annoy them, or they don't want to, nobody has a great friendly interaction.
Right, yeah. So talk about the mask. What was the mask?
Yeah, mate, fantastic. That's probably the biggest message. It's the mask we all wear as cops, because you've always got to be on your game. You've always got to be the alpha male or female. You've always got to be in control. You've always got to be the one that has no fear, in inverted commas. So as you said before, the criminal always knows who's the rookie and who's the vet on the street. So from the minute you pull the uniform on, 5 minutes into your first shift, you've got to have that persona that you're hard as nails and you don't give a shit, nothing scares you. And you need that. That's just an operational reality. The problem is for me, I never turned that off. So the normal, like I talk about the normal fears or doubts or insecurities about who you are and what you're doing that everybody has in their life, I think it's just a human condition. I then wrap that around this persona of being this hard-ass cop. And then being in the K9 unit, as you said, there was 43 out of 6,000, so it was pretty hard to get into at that time, and I was lucky enough to get in. Then it's different now, but at that time we were the only cops on the street dressed tactically, so we had like the SWAT sort of uniform and drop holsters and those sort of things. So, we looked at goods from that tactical point of view, stood out very much from other police who were dressed it like more of a dress uniform now. Back then. So you really were you stood out. You worked one up. So, I always worked on my own with the dog, never had a partner, or rarely had a partner. You went from job to job at 100 miles an hour and often took control of those situations because you're doing so many of them. The other general patrol guys sort of looked to us to take control of it. So it was not only just a persona to the public, it was a persona to other police. And I never learned how to turn that off. So the funny thing was, as life went on, and I only realised this in hindsight, as life went on, I was like the skinny 19-year-old kid. Inside and outside, I built like the Superman, mask, which had me look to other people like I knew what I was doing, had me look like I was very brave and courageous and nothing scared me, but that just wasn't the case. And now I realise, and I've had so many of these chats with other police that I worked with, and they say to me, mate, and guys who've read my book, I've sent it to a number of them for their input, and they said, we would never have guessed any of that. Never have guessed that you were that you had those fears and doubts inside and that insecurity. And I said, oh yeah, like it used to eat me up. And they're like, yeah, me too. I was exactly the same. So every one of them I've spoken to, some of the hardest guys I know, the toughest men I know, exactly the same. But here we all were, walking around with this mask on, pretending that nothing gets to you, pretending that nothing bothers you, pretending that nothing scares you. So I'll be driving, 100 miles an hour to literally 100 miles an hour using the imperial system, mate. I did a bit of conversion.
Thank you for converting that.
Driving 100 miles an hour, lights and sirens on my own, and going to whatever it might be, a barricaded suspect with a firearm in a domestic situation, or armed hold up or whatever, and going there so quickly, and I'd get there and there'd be smoke coming off the tires, off the brakes in my car, and the engine would stink, and I'd skid to a halt, tires squealing, because I thought that was pretty, and I thought that was cool, let's face it, everybody likes to have that sort of experience. And so the guys would look at me and think, wow, this guy's really got it under control. But inside, I was terrified. Now, inside, I'm going to the job really and terrified is probably overstating it, very scared of what the fuck am I going to get here, and can I handle it? Because, am I going to turn up and this guy's going to be firing shots, and am I going to freeze? Am I going to be able to get through it? Is that what's going to happen? And so I built the mask, and I never froze once. I never backed off once. And to my own detriment in the end for my own mental health, but it wasn't the jobs that affected me. It was the mask, because then I felt like a fraud. And the biggest thing to me is honour and loyalty and honesty. And so then I felt like a fraud, because then I'm thinking these police perceive me a certain way to be quite courageous and brave and whatever. Their words, not mine. And here I am, knowing that in my head I'm really pretty insecure, and I get scared going to these jobs, and I have fear, and not realising that was just a normal reaction, right? Because I've grown up with my old man who, same thing, hard as nails cop, very, very well known for his bravery in our department, was at that time would certainly have been the best known cop in our whole department of 6,000. And so coming in on the back of that reputation too, certainly in hindsight had its challenges, and we were both very similar. And him and I have had those chats since, and parts of it he disagrees with, but there's other parts, and he's 71 now, and parts of it that he's like, yeah, mate, he goes, I'll be going to those jobs really quite fearful, but the overriding drive, and mine was the same, was I have got to get there no matter what, and risk my own personal safety because someone needs us. And if I don't go, then who's going?
If not me, then who, right?
Absolutely.
So, it's one of those, again, goes back to our training too, that command presence they teach you I mean, I remember in the academy there was some comment, I'm shortening it, but the comment was, if you get somewhere and you don't know what to do, make something up and just act like,
Yeah.
and just look like you know what you're doing. Because half the time looking like you know what you're doing is going to convince somebody to follow your instructions, or your orders. So yeah, they actually teach you to put on that mask, and there's not a lot of discussion about how to take it off on a daily basis. Do you think that just debriefing calls and being able, if you were able to acknowledge at the end of a call like that, you got your squad together, your buddies together, and we're able to say, "Whew, that was sketchy. That could have gone gnarly," and I was a little scared. How about you guys? And if we were able to share that, do you think that alone might have been a factor that might have prevented some of the things that came after this?
100%. Yep, definitely. And that's the thing that I find, again, I talk about irony a lot, but it's the ironic part to think that there might have been 6 or 8 guys and girls there at that incident that felt exactly the same thing. There was, I remember a particular one, and I think it's one I talk about in the book, but it's basically there's a party, or the call came over a barricaded suspect firing shots, had hostages. I got to the job, and very long story short, I ended up taking 2 detectives with me, and we went to go and do a recce, a reconnaissance of the place. And we have an inspector, probably I'd know, like your captain or someone, or patrol sergeant, whoever was running the scene. He said, all you are to do is go and look. And I'm like, yeah, sure. So I take 2 guys with me. We get around the corner, and they're like, we're not just looking, are we? I'm like, no way. So we sort of get there, look at it. He's fired a couple of shots out of the house. There's nothing going on at that point. And we're at the front, and there's these 2 guys with me, and they're really tough men. And I remember so vividly, thinking to myself, I don't want to go into that house, but now I have to, because I'm the one they're looking at. I'm the one who said, look, I'll take the guys and do reconnaissance. I'm the one who's now here. And, tactically, worst thing I could have done, professionally, I probably should have just contained and call out. But I was like, you know what? We've got to go in, because if this guy has got a gun, he has got hostages, I don't know what he's doing, and we don't even know the situation. So we went, kicked in the door, made entry, and the guy ran down the hallway. I chased him, tackled him, and he was going for a gun under the bed. Turns out it was just a drug party, and he was firing shots in the air because he was off his face. Now, I look back now and just think, wow, it turned out well, and my instinct and everything kicked in, and the job turned out fine. But one of the things that drove me to go through that door was the fear of what people would think if I didn't. And I think that's part of that mask, like there's far smarter ways to do our job if you're tactically sound and confident in yourself to go, you know what, let's not go yet. And it's something that I've noticed, and I've never worked in the US as an officer, but it seems you guys, and certainly I find the department I'm in now, the guys I talk to, they're more and more like it. Like, we got very little tactical training. I did a fair bit of work with our SWAT team, and so picked up stuff from them. But the idea for you guys to stage away from an area, if you can, and go in en masse more tactically, and those sort of things, to me, just makes a lot more sense. Where back, we're talking a long time ago now too, like in the early 90s, we probably ran into a lot of situations headlong, because there was a group of us, we were young guys, we're all alpha males, we're all pretty arrogant, cocky. No one wants to look soft. So everybody gets spurred to go, because nobody's got the guts to put their hand up and go, hang on a minute, let's slow down and actually do this properly. And then that's where the mask comes in. If one person has the courage to say, you know what, I'm actually really struggling here. These things are really worrying me. Or, this job, that job we went to last week, or as you say, at the end of the call, whether it's at the end of you might do 10 shifts in a row or 5 shifts in a row, and you go out for a few beers or whatever it is, and actually have those chats. And then, to me, I think it's, if nothing else I can achieve out of doing what I'm doing for police and military, for soldiers, I think very similarly, is just to go, you know what, everybody, look at the guy on your left and the guy on your right. They're all in a similar situation. They're all affected by what they see. They all have these fears and doubts. Talk about them. And the thing that I've actually sort of grabbed hold of very strongly more recently is the guys that talk you down, the guys that want to point out the people who they consider are weak, or, if you and I are working together in a squad and there's 6 guys there, and I say, you know what, I was really a bit worried about that job. As you said, it was a bit sketchy, and I was a bit scared going into it. the guy who mouths off the loudest and says, "No way, mate, I never get scared. What are you talking about? You're a pussy." He's the one who's struggling the most. And that's the part that I find, if we can sort of just open that door and go, you know what, talking about this stuff is absolutely essential for all of us to be better. Because I go now, if I talked about this stuff, I'd still be a cop. And I don't have any regrets around it because I've had the experience now to be able to help other people with it. But how many great, officers are lost who could still be on the job with great levels of experience, but they go because they just don't talk about stuff. And, we've had a huge spate here in the last few years of police suicide, and I know you guys are very similar. And to me, that is just such a tragedy, to think that somebody who belongs to such, to the band of blue, to the band of brothers, somebody who belongs to such a strong fraternity of men and women who would do anything to have your back, doesn't feel a confidence to be able to speak out about things that are troubling them. It breaks my heart, because you think those guys could have so easily been looked after. And when I got to the point, of lying in bed 3 nights in a row with a Glock in my hand, and then the next time I was at a party, and long story, but I ended up on the outside of a balcony for like 20 minutes, 24 or 26 floors up. I can never remember how many. The biggest thing was the fear of what people would think of me because I was weak was going to drive me to that point. Now, thank God I didn't do it, and whatever stopped me, if I just had those conversations and other people around me were like, you know what, yeah, I'm the same. I feel the same fear, the same whatever, then I would have been so good to go and get help and do whatever needed to be done and move on. And to me, that's the biggest thing with the mask. It eats away at you from the inside out.
Isn't it funny how we're so confident in each other's training and abilities in the physical sense? I mean, we risk our lives frequently, and we put our lives into the hands of our partners. Sometimes a dozen times in one shift, right? And there's no second thought to it. We have that level of trust with them on the physicality of the job, of if we get shot at, we're confident they're going to shoot back, or that they watch our 6 when we're doing the building search, and we have that level of confidence and trust with them on that end, but we don't have that level of trust with them on the emotional end, and it'd be such a gift to us as a group if we could trust each other in that same way. And I think we can. I think it's exactly what you're saying. We can. Somebody's just got to be the first to talk about it, and that's
it.
And that's really what you're doing here on the Strong Life Project. You alluded to it a minute ago, but what were the first signs of trouble that you remember? Was it the bender? You talked about coping with alcohol earlier, but what was the first time that actually scared you? You scared yourself.
Oh, gee, that's a good question. I can't really remember a first time. I can remember, so I was 19, and I didn't drink before I joined the police at all. So my granddad was an alcoholic. Dad doesn't drink, so alcohol just wasn't really around in my family. When I joined the police, one of my very first shifts was ended up at an end of shift barbecue with a dozen officers standing around drinking, and one of them turned to me and said, "Here," handed me a beer and said, "Do you drink?" And I had drunk before. It's not like I'd never tried. But I wasn't a heavy drinker, and I was like, yeah, of course I do, because I'm looking around going, well, everyone else is, so I'm not going to say no. And what I realised was the first probably signs of it is just that the frustration and anger. And it's probably, I was probably only 21 or 22, and again, got the strong Irish heritage, so I've got a good Irish temper, so, I didn't know which part of it was normal and which part of it wasn't. But it was the frustration and anger and probably at other cops too, looking around. And I remember looking at guys that would be my age now, pushing 50, who would have had 25 or 30 years on the job by that stage, or even, had, 10 or 15 years. And I remember looking at them thinking, why do you not give a shit? Why do you not care anymore? Why are you so cynical? And it was probably as I started to become cynical. It was probably only a couple of years into the job where I started to become very cynical of people, very, pretty reactive, and again, very isolated from normal society. That was the first warning sign in hindsight. The thing for me when I talk to other cops now, I go, the thing to look at, there's a great model that came out of Canada, and actually I'll find it and send it to you if you like, and our department has just adopted it. And ironically, I'm now going back into the department I work for, doing a bit of work with them on exactly this sort of stuff, which is fantastic. and it's like a green, yellow, orange, red light system. And they talk about things that to be aware of for mental health for police and for first responders. And they get changes in your behaviour. If you've always been someone who trains pretty regularly and you stop training, that's it. If you start drinking excessively, that's a sign. If you're becoming, you've got a much shorter temper, that's a sign. If you're married with kids, if you're more irritable towards your wife or you're more snappy with your kids, that's a sign. And to me, there's a fine line between being aware and being paranoid. But in this situation, Garrett, I don't think for a second that anybody can be too vigilant or too hyper aware for themselves to go, is the job affecting me? Because it is going to. But the sooner you get a hold of it, then the less impact it's going to have. And the people close to you, I think, are the ones who are probably going to be the ones who will see it before you do. So be it your wife or your best friend or your mum and dad or whoever that is. And to me, it's actually having the conversations with them and say, and I'll finish that and then I'll make that comment. Having the conversations with them to say, you know what, if you're seeing a change in my behaviour or you think there's something going on, please tell me because I might not see it. And now all this advice I give, I put myself back in that 22 or 23-year-old's body and I wouldn't have listened because I didn't care. I didn't even know it was a possibility. So to me, probably the three early warning signs would be excessive alcohol use. And excessive for me might have only been one or two nights every 2 weeks. Like it wasn't like I was getting up every morning and having whiskey for breakfast. The second part is definitely anger and being very quick to anger. And the third one for me is definitely like nightmares or dreams, flashbacks, whatever you want to call it. So when you're waking up in the middle of the night and I had, different girlfriends I had at the time, and certainly when I met my now ex-wife, when we weren't married when I was in the job, but I'd wake up in the morning and she'd be in another bedroom and I go, what's going on? She goes, oh, you were chasing or fighting someone in your sleep last night for ages and you kept hitting me, not as in, kept bumping into her. So she said I had to move beds. So any of those sort of things, that's not normal behaviour.
What was then the first time that you decided you needed to get help? Did it hit absolutely rock bottom for you before you did?
Yeah.
So
unfortunately, mate. Yeah.
So talk about you briefly mentioned him a minute ago, but I think, and I don't want to be salacious in bringing it up again, but I want people to understand how close and how bad it got for you. And
sure, mate. No, please don't apologise. I'm so happy to talk about it. So it was, I was getting angrier and angrier. I'd done about 7 years on the K9 unit, and then was just getting more and more angry. And I got to the point where I didn't even really want to go to work, which was just not like me, so I'd put on my uniform and I'd be frustrated and angry and simple things, mate. Like I remember vividly, there was a call and I can't remember what the job was, but there was a call for something, and as the dispatcher was trying to give the information, there was a lot of units talking over the top, and it was an urgent job. It was a pursuit or an armed hold-up or something similar, and I called to go to it, and they sent me like the low priority, and I was so angry, and I said no, I went back and said no, I'll be going code 2, priority code 2. They said no, you won't be, and I remember getting that angry that I punched the steering wheel and cracked the center cap of the steering wheel of the police car. And I was like, my language wasn't great, and I was so angry. And I remember thinking, like, that was just normal to me. And I got to the point of that frustration. I thought, that's it. So I left. A couple of friends of mine were in the covert surveillance unit, so obviously, plain clothes, unmarked cars, no police insignias, nothing. And then you're following around, drug dealers and major organised crime figures and different things. So it was pretty cool. And that was a job I thought would be pretty cool, and I went and did that for a while, and then that frustrated me because I was bored. There was, you sat in the car for 90% of the time, for 10% of the time I was 1,000 miles an hour, but 90% of the time I was bored and just stuck with my own thoughts in my head, and that did my head in. Went back to the K9 unit, and then I worked in the lowest socioeconomic area in our department works with, the highest crime, highest violence, worst resourced, and probably the worst place I could have gone in hindsight, but went there and just was so disinterested in going to calls. And I got to the point where I would only go if I was tasked. So they'd call me specifically as a dog unit, say, can you attend this job? Can you attend that job? And I got to the point where I was wanting to, I didn't avoid any, but I wanted to avoid jobs. And I thought, this just isn't me. And I had never considered that I would ever leave the police. That just was never a consideration. So I was going to be a cop, either dead by 30 or till I retired. That was always going to be the case. And I used to say to people all the time, I would do this job even if they didn't pay me. So if somebody paid my bills, I would do it even if they didn't pay me because I just love it. So it got to the point I went to a particular job, a very long story. Basically, a guy had stabbed another guy 14 times. We found him in a rural sort of property and, took him into custody, put him in the back of a patrol car. He kicked out all the windows and he was a pretty violent guy. He's an outlaw motorcycle guy, gang member. I pulled him out of the car. We had and he got his cuffs in front of his, out from behind his legs and in front of him, and he's put on a pretty good show. And I've let's say, restrained him fairly, but basically I just dominated him as hard as I could. So I was very violent, choked him unconscious, and we hogtied him. And I had to take a young policewoman back to get another patrol vehicle because that was obviously then a crime scene. And we got in the car and drive away, and she was only a pretty young girl. And I remember driving along, and she's looking out the window and just very quiet. And I said to her, "You okay?" And she looked at me, and she had one tear running down her face. And she said, "I thought you were going to kill him." And I looked at her and I said, "Well, I was." I said, "Me or him, it's him." And then she didn't talk to me for the rest of the drive. I went home. So I dropped her off at the station, and I had some pretty harsh opinions on her at that point. I thought, she's weak and whatever. Went home, went to bed. It was probably 2 or 3 in the morning. Woke up at 5 in the morning, shaking and crying, and just had a breakdown pretty much. And I was like, "What the fuck?" Then sat up for about half an hour, went back to sleep, woke up, mid-morning, and just thought, no, I'm not going to work today. A group of my friends were going to the races, horse races, drinking. So I thought I'd do that. Went to the doctor. Got a certificate. He told me he thought I had glandular fever at that point, which is like mono, I think you guys call it. And so I went out that night, big night on the drink. Another friend of mine who I now know is going through a similar sort of thing. We'd probably had a 12-hour drinking session. We were at a bar. He was having a big argument with his wife outside the bar. I went outside to sort of calm him down. She went inside. Him and I ended up in a fight, and I broke his nose. And then I never went back to the job from that point. And because from that, when I was on sick leave for the glandular fever for like 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and I went back and saw the doctor, and he said, I don't know how you've still been working and whatever. I was so run down and so exhausted that I didn't realise that I'd even had the glandular fever. My body was even shutting down. And it got to that point of the darkness then that I was so terrified of not being able to be a cop. And like, this is another whole hour podcast, so I don't want to go into all the detail. Basically went and saw psychiatrists and psychologists because I had to with the department. They told me that I had severe PTSD. I didn't even know what it was. I thought it was only something Vietnam veterans here in Australia suffered from. I'd never heard of it in policing. And so I was shattered. And got to the point, mate, then I was on sick leave, still had my dog at home and my Glock at home because we always took our firearm home and the vehicle home. And somehow the squad that I was in, they'd overlooked taking my firearm. So I still had that with me. And as I was looking at the very real possibility, only over a couple of weeks of being on sick leave, a number of good friends of mine, in inverted commas, cops, dropped away and I never heard from them. I got a fair bit of feedback from some other guys, that I was getting ridiculed pretty badly by the guys that I thought were my really good friends, good mates. And so that all impacted me so badly. I got to the point where I was barely doing anything. And so I'd had a huge fight with my girlfriend at the time, who became my wife. She'd left and gone to back to her mother's house, and I'd spent most of one day drinking, which I never drank at home, but I went out and met a couple of guys for lunch. We'd had a pretty big drinking session. I went home and went into the gun safe, pulled the gun out, and I was dead set lying in bed for hours with it in tears, and went from tears to anger to disbelief to overwhelm, and had the Glock there in my hand just time and time again, just trying to find the reasons not to end my life. And that my ex-wife came home, my girlfriend at the time came back, and that continued on for another 2 days. She never knew. She went to sleep. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, same thing. And it was like over a weekend, so I was out drinking during the afternoons. It was all just the worst possible scenario, and got to the point that it was 3 nights in a row, and there's pretty much finger on the trigger, gun at my head for hours on end, trying to find reasons not to. And that dark, and the part that I find so amusing now is that I can talk about it so freely and so peacefully now to you on the other side of the world I've never met, and to however many thousands of people might listen to this podcast, and it doesn't concern me. Back then, the fear of people knowing I was struggling and the fear of people knowing where I'd gotten to had me want to take my life rather than ask for help. And that was such a heartbreaking experience for me now to look back on, that any human being can get to that point when they're surrounded by their brothers and sisters in blue who, as you say, operationally have got their back all the time. And then only another week or two later. So what I actually did was I called one of the guys I work with in that unit, in the dog unit, and I said, hey, mate, the boss has forgot to take my gun, come and get it, because I don't want him getting in the shit. So I didn't tell him anything about it. He came right and took it. So then that was sort of that instantaneous ability to end my life left, which was fantastic. So and then I went to a party not long after, and there was a lot of the SWAT guys, other dog squad guys, and I was the king of the kids, in that group. I was always a smart ass. I always had a sarcastic remark, and was always very competitive in what we do. I'd be driving to a job at 3 a.m, lights and sirens, and I'd be on the phone ringing up one of the other dog handlers, going, "Yep, I'm going to get another one. I'm going to catch someone. I'm ahead of the tally." Those sort of games. And went and had that.
We all have that guy.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. And I was 100% that guy. And went to this party, and all these guys that I looked up to and I was held in high regard didn't know what to say to me, and I get it, but I didn't at the time. So I felt like I was just being shunned, and felt like that I was losing it all. And I was a pretty heavy smoker at that time, which again is part of the whole self-medication thing. I went back to the hotel room. It was on the Gold Coast, which is like a tourist sort of spot, about an hour from where I live. Went back to my unit to get another packet of cigarettes, and was just so, again, beside myself, going, how am I going to move forward? What am I going to do? If I'm not a cop, what do I do? My whole identity's gone. And I sat on the outside of the balcony again for, probably 20 or 25 minutes smoking cigarettes. And I was pretty 3 sheets to the wind at that point, trying to, again, find reasons not to jump off. And I didn't, thank God. But it was actually getting to the depths of that darkness, mate, that I never knew existed. And since that time, when I've spoken to other guys who have been in a similar situation, they've, a number of them got to that similar place. And the funny thing that is always the case, the guys that have suicided, that, a couple who I knew, and they weren't very close to me, but I knew them, pretty well. And a number of other guys who I don't know, but good friends of mine know, said they were the guys you would never, ever think it would happen to. They were always the life of the party, the biggest personality. They were always the guys you look at and go, he's living the dream. It could not be him, because of that mask again, mate. And that's where it comes to.
What was it that eventually, you mentioned, leaving your place on the line, on the thin blue line. And I think that a lot of guys struggle with that. And you talked already about the fear of what would happen. And, to me, I was having this conversation with a partner the other day when we were kind of jokingly talking about how you go to a barbecue and you're having a conversation with an accountant or someone, and it's just not interesting to you, in the sense that, after law enforcement, after you've done this, after you've gone 1,000 miles an hour, after you've seen the things you see, nothing else matters, in the sense that there's no other job that can be as important. And it's easy to feel that way. And you get into this habit of thinking just that I can't go back to the private sector because nothing else is going to be as important as what I'm doing now. And that's obviously slightly self-serving, but I think it's a very real belief, that I was in marketing before I became a cop, right? There's no way I could go back to being a marketing manager at a mid-level firm, holding meetings, staff meetings on Monday morning, talking about how we're going to sell toilet paper, right?
That's right.
After this job, how did you eventually become okay with the fact that you needed to leave?
It was a pivotal. moment. A very good friend of mine who's quite an aloof individual, he rang me not long after I was on stress leave, and he said, "You've got to come out and come and see me." It was like a Tuesday night, and I said, "No, no way." And he said, "Yeah, look, come out. I want to have a couple of beers and need to talk to you about what's going on." And I avoided those conversations. Obviously, went out and met him, and and again, his words, not mine. And he sort of said to me, he said, "You can't leave the job." He said, "Because if a guy like you leaves a job, who loves it, lives it, and breathes it, then what are the rest of us doing here? It doesn't make any sense." And I said, "Mate, well, I just have to go because I literally don't think I'm going to be able to cope and survive if I stay." And he said to me, he said, "Tell me in one sentence why you have to leave." And I said to him, "The cost to me personally of doing the job is far too high compared to the good that I can do." So it actually came to the point where for the first time in my life, out of pure necessity, I had to look and put myself first, because if I kept doing the job, number one, I probably wasn't going to be very safe for other officers and other people, because I wasn't in the place where I was going to be operating at my best. And number two, that it was literally going to drive me into the ground, and it just wasn't worth it. And unfortunately, at that point, there was no such thing as mental health for police. There was no such thing as talking about it or whatever else. So I literally then, I didn't know what I was going to do. So I went and studied financial planning, and I did that. And then I've worked in property development for many years. And as much as my job's, I enjoy it, but I don't love it. And it's not. I'm far more passionate about the strong life and helping police and doing that than I am about property development. I make a lot more money than I did doing as a police officer and all those things. But, mate, still exactly what you say is true. The unfortunate part for police who retire is to understand that there is not going to be another job that will give you the same feeling you get. That's just a reality. My dad, 42 years in, he's been out now 11 years, and his whole life still revolves around the police. That's the only thing he's happy about talking about, being involved in. He's involved in a lot of retired police association stuff, and that's great. And I think it's, again, one of the things that we need to talk about and educate officers about is, if maybe you get to a point where you can't do this thing for the rest of your life. Who knows? Hopefully not. If you're prepared to do the work and the prehab and the diet and the sleep and all the things I think really contribute to the mental health breakdown, if you do all that stuff and talk about these things early, then you can do it forever. If you get to the point where you have to go, it's understanding that is reality. You're not going to find something else that's as great. Something that I've, in the early stages, I didn't want anything to do with police. I was really quite anti-police when I left, and I was pretty bitter. And I blamed the department for why I ended up where I ended up and all these things. And in the end, they were all my choices. It was a consequence of my own action. They could have done a better job, sure, but I'm not a victim to it. It was my choice. The thing that I found was I maintained a really strong group of friends that were cops, and still being a police officer will be the best years of any career I have, I believe. But CrossFit, ironically, and I know you CrossFit, and people who don't think it's a cult, but that's one of the places that I've been doing it 7 or 8 years now, and I'm by no means any elite athlete, but it's somewhere I find a lot of camaraderie, and you get to push yourself really hard and whatever. So it's actually trying to find things in your life, hobbies, whether it's, for me, CrossFit's part of it. A big part of it now is doing these podcasts that I do and writing books and talking to cops. Whether it's, volunteering as a firefighter, like whatever. Find something else in your life that can fill a little bit of that gap that the police leaves, because you're never going to fill it with normal things.
And I think too, you're a point that fill it with service. Right. I mean, that you're
absolutely
going back and filling that void with a service in what you're doing, in the books you're writing, and then in the Strong Life Project. So let's talk about that. The stronglifeproject.com, that's your website, and then the podcast. What is the podcast? What is it about? What's your goals with it? And give people a general sense of the message.
Yeah, sure. So the message really, it's very much focused towards men, but I've changed that almost to go focus towards alpha personality. So there's plenty of alpha women in the police, right? But it's very much, for me, focused towards men, and not just police, military, first responders, but that sort of personality. It's about just delivering that positive message to men about, I think we've got pretty soft in a lot of ways. So I think men in reality, in life, In 2017, we don't know whether we should be holding doors open for women or not. We don't know whether it's okay to be strong or not. We don't know whether being an alpha male is good or not. There's all this sort of rubbish. And there's a lot of crap that goes on, Garrett, that's about, men not talking about about things. So the strong life itself, strong is an acronym for living with strength, tenacity, resilience, optimism, nurturing, and generosity. And the whole essence of it is about just my story as an example of a pretty extreme version of where you can get to if you don't look after yourself and you don't do what's best for you. But the whole overarching message is just getting men talking about what's going on for them. Women talk all the time about how they feel and what's going on and what they struggle with and what they don't. We don't. We keep it to ourselves. It's a very good mate of mine who's not a cop. We went to high school together for a number of years. I'd ring him and say, hey, how are you? And he'd go, same shit, different day. That was just the general response. Mm-hmm. And as I've sort of gone through this bit of a journey, and I hate that word, but he's gone through something similar in his life, and we talk about it often, just that men, people in general, but men as a group I think I can influence, really look down on anybody who speaks out because they're finding things difficult, anybody who wants help, anybody who's not sure what's going on in their life and how they can change it. We look at as weak. So Strong Life is just about giving some information and starting the conversation about men's mental health, about how to deal, as a husband, as a father. I've got 2 daughters, 12 and 9. I've been through a divorce, In a lot of ways, I've ticked every box on how to not do things well in my life. In some ways, that to be able to pass a bit of that knowledge and experience on to go, you know what, if you're willing to trust yourself, and it's the number one thing, trust yourself in who you are. And one of my favourite sayings is, what other people think of me is none of my business. Just not give a shit what other people think. And it's not easy, and it takes practice like any other skill. But if you can practice that skill and get to the point where you trust yourself and you look after you, number one, then everything else in your life turns out fine. But we've got to be talking to each other and also looking at your guy to your left and the guy to your right, whether you're a cop, whether you're a soldier, whether you're a builder or whether you're an accountant, looking around at your friends and going, are they okay? Because I don't know how many times you've had the conversation with a guy who's struggling, and a couple of guys I know that have suicided, and there'll be one or two who'll go, oh, I didn't think he was doing so great, but, I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to intrude. To me, it's about opening that up and going, that's just such bullshit. That one of the podcasts I did recently is like, what would you say standing at their graveside? So I do the daily podcast. It's probably 10 or 12 minutes on different topics, just things that come up in life. And it's my opinion. It's, for 15 years now since I left the police, I've done every self-help, personal development, happy clapping, course that I hated every minute of, most of them. But I've gained a lot of great knowledge and skills out of it to now where I'm the happiest I've ever been in my life, fittest and healthiest I've ever been, in great relationship, awesome relation with my kids, and life's really going so well. And it's just about trying to help other men realise and other cops realise that you can have that.
What are some of your favorite resources to direct people to for those self-help or development or any of those things?
Sure.
Do you have any books or anything, websites, anything like that? Yeah,
there's a lot. There's a lot of books. Look, I've read so many different books. Basically, to me, is just it's personal to who you are, right? So, like your podcast, I just Googled police podcast, saw yours, and I listen to yours now. And even though I'm not a serving officer, I pick up a lot of great things from that. To me, it's actually about now, whatever it is that you're looking for inspiration on or education on, go to Google and type it in, because it's just really that simple. We've never been in a better environment in our lives to be able to say, if you want to be a better dad, type in how to be a better dad. If you want to be a better cop, police podcasts or whatever. Mm-hmm. There's so many different books, Matt. I've read a lot of Deepak Chopra, is a bit of a spiritual guy. I've read a lot of, I'm having a mental blank. The guy, Wayne Dyer. And then I listen to people like, Gary Vaynerchuk. I don't know if you've heard of Gary V. I listen to Gary V. So I'm just going to open up at the moment I've got, because I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I've got The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, which is about, leaping to a new place in your life. Tribes is one by Seth Godin that I love. Crush It by Gary V. And a number of these are business sort of books, but but it's all the same thing. whatever's going to make you great in your career as a cop, as an accountant, will make you a great husband and a great father. But the number one resource for me is just looking after yourself as, you as your own resource. So as far as eating well, training well, sleeping well, using alcohol and stuff in moderation, just looking after yourself, treat yourself as a number one priority. And something that I heard Greg Amundsen say on your podcast, and I think he's amazing, was, for police to treat themselves as professional warrior athlete. If the guys listening to your podcast were professional athletes in the NFL or the NBA, how seriously would they take themselves, in their health and fitness and their nutrition and all those things, is to understand that you guys are professional athletes and in far more stressful situations than NBA or NFL players. So put the work in, educate yourselves, do whatever it takes to make sure you're operating at your best for yourself. And that, that's the simplest thing these days. Nobody even needs to know you're doing this work, because that's still a big thing for people. Mm-hmm. You can listen to these podcasts, no one knows. You can be reading books, no one knows. You can be listening to webinars, no one knows. To me, Facebook, social media is an amazing thing for that. All my social media feed it's not full of people's photos of their breakfast and dinner, because I don't give a shit. It's, it's full of personal development. It's full of fitness. It's full of those sort of things. And every article that pops up, Facebook's probably my biggest resource, because I just look at the things that other people like. I look at the things, like I've looked at your podcast, who you follow, and I was just listening to the podcast before we got on here with the guy that from New Jersey, whose name escapes me now, that's from the
Wilson.
fitness.
Yeah, Wilson from Police Fitness Nutrition. Yeah,
Wilson. So guys like that, you just go on and I'll listen to their podcasts and what they're doing and the resources they come up with. It's just that whole being able to be involved in that same community, and for cops, it's cops, so you can understand what's going on and share that around. That's part of when you start talking about this stuff, you start sharing your resources. Yeah.
It's all excellent advice. Shaun, thanks for being on the show. Where can people learn more about the Strong Life Project? Where can they find you?
Yeah, so the stronglifeproject.com, that's where it is. And that'll be, I'm launching the book, My Dark Companion, in the next probably 3 weeks. That's being published. So that'll be on there as well. And that's very much that resource for, police to understand the journey and understand how to come out the other side. And then the Strong Life Project podcast, it's obviously on iTunes or Stitcher Radio. And, by all means, reach out to me on Facebook, Strong Life Project. I'm on Instagram as Shaun O'Gorman, which is ShaunOgorman. But, just if you Google a Strong Life Project, you'll find the website. Hit me up through the contact us there. So happy to talk to any of your guys that have that sort of information that they want. And pretty soon, if they get on there and just subscribe into the page on the email list, then I can let them know what's coming up. I'm going to start doing probably weekly webinars soon for probably for police and military specific, I'm thinking at this point, just so guys can get a bit of that information and, again, be anonymously typing in questions and asking, opinions on things and giving it out that way. So they're probably the easiest ways.
Excellent. We'll put all the links to the show in the show notes for all your contacts for people to find you. On the podcast and on Instagram. I really enjoy the podcast. I like the 10-minute, obviously this is a longer format podcast. I like your 10-minute episodes. They're full of good doses of ass kicking and
Thank you.
Just, good like there was, I forget which one I was listening to, but I was moping about something, and I had your episode on in anticipation of you coming on in a couple of weeks, and it got me out of my funk for the day too. So I get a lot out of that, and I encourage everyone to subscribe to your show, the Strong Life the Strong Life Project podcast on Instagram or on Twitter. Sorry, Jesus, guess I'm done talking. On iTunes or Stitcher Radio, just like the Squad Room is. Shaun, thanks for your service to everything, to all the cops all around the world. I know that you're reaching people, and I know that people are going to hear this, and I know, and they're going to have a positive. It's going to have a positive influence on listeners here. I know that because I've gotten emails from people who are in your situation or who have been there. Emails from people who are, maybe sat in bed last night with the Glock at their side,
sure,
and had the strength to get up and try again.
Mate, sorry to cut. There's just one thing I'd like to say before we finish, and it's actually. Sure. I got a email recently, and it's just off the back of my story on my website, and that's pretty, there's nowhere near the detail that we've gone into today. and it was from an officer, and I won't in the States, and I won't say where he was from for his anonymity, but he emailed me and just said he was involved in an incident where he was shot multiple times, survived, and got to a place where he was forced to retire off the job. And his words in the email were, "I got to such a dark place that I didn't know how I was going to move forward." And he said, he said, "Your story was like looking in a mirror, and understanding that you've come through the other side gives me hope." And that was it. Like, it was only like, it was a 2 or 3 lines, and I was pretty emotional. I teased my eyes when I read it, and I sent the email back to him. I sent an email back to him, and the way that it was written, and again, this is the cop coming at me. The way that it was written, the grammar wasn't great, the sentence structure wasn't great. I'm looking at it going, you know what? The time it was sent from the States was early AM. He's probably in a pretty dark place. I'd say probably been, drinking alcohol fairly heavily for a few hours by the tone of the email. So I sent him an email back straight away the next day, and I said, "Look, anything I can do to help you out, brother, let me know. I'm so happy to talk," etc. And I didn't hear back. And then I let it go for about a week, and I sent him another one. And I actually sent him a copy of the transcript of the book at that point. And I said, "Look, read this if you like. I don't expect you to respond. It's the last time I'm going to contact you, but just know that there's plenty of other people out there going through the same thing. And if we all stand together, we can help each other." And now I never heard back from that guy, right? And part of me goes, I hope that he's okay. And because I knew his name and whatever, and I Googled him and had a look at his Facebook or one of his social media profiles, and he's still active on there, so obviously he hasn't taken his life or anything. But I looked at that guy and thought, you know what? Obviously, at the deepest, darkest time that he was, where he's obviously pretty inebriated, and he's reached out to me on the other side of the world. If I can tell my story and it can make a difference, that's what it's all about. And the message for that, for all of the cops out there, is if you guys talk to each other and tell each other your stories, then that's all the difference you need to make. It's a simple thing.
Excellent. I love it. Shaun, thanks for your time, man. Appreciate it. I hope that we can maybe add a second episode here where we can talk about these things in depth even further. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Squad Room. If you like what you heard today, and if you got something out of the conversation, please consider leaving a review on iTunes. I read them all, and it really helps spread the word of the show. If you listened to this episode and you heard something that spoke to you directly, and you acknowledge that you need help, there's resources out there for you. There's 2 of my favorites. There's Safe Call Now, which is specifically for first responders, a 24-hour hotline. Counselors are standing by and able to talk to you about whatever the issue is. You can call them at 206-459-3020. You can go to their website, safecallnow.org. The National Suicide Prevention Hotline, also 1-800-273-TALK, T-A-L-K. Please use those phone numbers. Use them if you need to talk to somebody. Email me, Garrett@thesquadroom.net, if you need more resources, and I will do absolutely everything I can to help you get there. Talk to your friends. Talk to your loved ones. It's important to talk about it. That's why we do these episodes. So if you heard something that you know someone needs to hear, you can forward this episode directly to them from our website at thesquadroom.net. You can share it with them. You can grab their phone, open their podcast app, and download this directly to them so they know that they are not alone. They know that there's other people out there struggling with this, and they know that you can get better. Shaun's a perfect example of someone who couldn't get much closer to the end and who dug himself out of it, and he did it the right way. All right, to keep up to date on the Squad Room, you can text The Squad Room, all one word, to 44222 to get signed up for our mailing list directly from your phone. Of course, follow me on Instagram and Twitter at The Squad Room, and also on Facebook. And as I mentioned a minute ago, our job's tougher than anything you can be put into a few words or just an hour-long podcast. If you want to reach out, start a conversation, ask a question, reach me at Garrett@thesquadroom.net. That's Garrett with 2 R's and 2 T's. Lastly, I want to tell you that this episode is brought to you by Audible.com. With over 180,000 titles in their inventory, Audible has hundreds of audiobooks that apply to us as first responders. If it's a slow shift or a long commute, audiobooks are a great way to continue your education. To get a free 30-day trial and a free audiobook of your choice, go to audibletrial.com/The Squad Room to sign up. Even if you just use it for the 30 days and you don't subscribe, you really help out this show so we can do things like get Shaun on and talk about these important topics. Until next time, take care of each other, take care of yourself, and stay safe.